Hello kids, this is Mr. Whistler with your video lesson of the day, and today we are going to be talking about the Constitutional Convention and Compromise, specifically the Great Compromise and the Three-Fifths Compromise. We have a couple of vocab words today, and our first one is Federalist. Benjamin Franklin was a Federalist because he helped create the Constitution and he supported the Constitution. So the official supporters of the Constitution, people who wanted a stronger central government, and these people feared anarchy more than they feared losing their rights. Our second word is anti-federalist. Patrick Henry was an anti-federalist. He believed the Constitution gave the government too much power and didn't properly protect the people's rights. The official is individuals who opposed ratification of the Constitution, or the people who wanted a weak federal government. They thought the government would be too powerful and it did not properly protect the people's rights. Now, before we start talking about these compromises, let's review a little bit. James Madison and his boys marched into the Constitutional Convention and proposed that they throw out the Articles of Confederation and create a whole new, stronger Constitution. They called their plan the Virginia Plan. And in their plan, there was a two-house legislature. Both houses' membership was based on state population. So the bigger the state, the more representatives they got in Congress or the legislature. Well, the small states didn't like this. They didn't think it was fair because the bigger states were getting more representatives. So they created their own plan, and they called it the New Jersey Plan. Under this plan, they revised the Articles of Confederation, and they added a couple of new things to them. They added the power to tax and the power to regulate trade, and they added a weak executive branch with more than one person. Well, the convention members ultimately voted to go with the Virginia Plan, so they worked to create a new government based on that plan. Now, the problem was both sides had a legitimate gripe. The big states did not like the New Jersey Plan because it let the few control the many. They didn't think that was right. And the small states didn't like the Virginia Plan because it gave them more representation in the legislature. So they were at a stalemate. They didn't know what to do. Well, this guy, Roger Sherman from Connecticut, suggested a compromise. Now, he said, since we have two houses, why not just make one house's membership based on equality and make the other house's membership based on state population? And everybody kind of looked around the room and looked at each other and thought, well, why didn't we think of that? That seems like the perfect solution. So that's what they did. One house, the Senate, each state would have two members or seats, which is based on equal representation. And the House of Representatives, membership or seats for each state, is based on the state's population. So the bigger states get more and the smaller states get less. But each side got a little bit of what they wanted. One house is based on state population and the other house is based on equality. So this became known as the Great Compromise. I think that we should go with the Virginia Plan. It is much better than your plan, Patterson.
I'd have to disagree with you, sir, for I think the New Jersey Plan is better, for it is more fair.
Chill, boys. There's no need for arguing, for both plans are good. Instead of just choosing one plan, how about we combine them into the Great Compromise? Aren't I smart? All right, well, here's the New Jersey Plan. Notice one House legislature, one vote from each state, and it's based on equality. The right to tax and regulate trade in a weak executive branch. Here's the Virginia plan, a two-house legislature. Both houses' membership are based on state population. This one benefited the big states, this one benefited the small states. And here's the fair. The New Jersey plan allows the few to control the many. We will never allow that. If that's your position, then my state is ready to leave this convention, and so will Maryland and Delaware. Well, here is the compromise. Two-house legislature, both elected by the people. HR stands for House of Representatives. Its membership is based on population. And the Senate has two representatives from each state, and its membership is based on equality. Delegates broke the deadlock between large and small population states and the issue of representation when they approved the Great Compromise. All right, the Three-Fifths Compromise. Now, this one had to do with counting slaves for representation purposes. Now, after they passed the Great Compromise, everybody was pretty excited about this, and these guys were all jazzed up about trying to figure out how many representatives their states would get in the House of Representatives. So they actually started figuring out. They were like, hey, we have... Now, I'm not exactly sure what the criteria was for population relating to membership, but for argument's sake, let's just say it was something like this. For every 10,000 people in a state, they got one representative in the House of Representatives. So 20,000 people would equal 2 representatives, 30,000 people would equal 3 representatives, and so forth. Well, they were sitting there, hey, we have 100,000 people in our state, so that means we get 10 representatives in the House of Representatives. That's awesome. And then other people were like, we only have 50,000 people, we only get 5. And other people were like, well, and they were all figuring out their representatives. Well, one of the Southern delegates said, hey, we made a mistake. He's like, what do you mean we made a mistake? Well, we have slaves. We forgot to count our slaves. And like, oh, yeah. How many slaves do we have? We have 20,000 slaves. Oh, there's 2 more representatives. That's awesome. Well, when they were talking about that, some of the northern guys overheard them. And they were like, did you hear what those guys said? He's like, no. He's like, they said they were going to count their slaves to help get them more representatives in the House. And he said, well, what's wrong with that? They're people too. No, they're not. Those guys are always telling us that slaves are property. He goes, you're right. Hey, are you guys trying to use slaves as part of your population count? And they're like, yeah. The northern guys were like, you can't do that. And they're like, why not? They're people. No, they're not. You keep telling us they're property. So the southern guys said, they all huddled up and they got together and they were like, yeah, they're right. We always tell them they're property. What are we going to do? Let's just tell them that we're going to do it anyway. We're going to do it anyway. We're counting our slaves and there's nothing you can do about it. So then the northern guys huddled together and they're like, what are we going to do about this? We can't let them count their slaves because then they'll have more representatives than we do. I got this, boys. I got it. Listen to this. All right. You guys are constantly saying that your slaves are property. Well, do you want us to use our cows and horses? Because that's our property. Oh, it's not the same thing. Well, not only can you not count your slaves for representation purposes, since they're property, we're going to tax them. Well, the southern guys just lost it. What? This isn't going to work. If you guys try to stop slavery, we're going to leave. We're not going to do this. So, Southern delegates wanted to include slaves in their population counts to gain more delegates in the House in order to protect slavery. and what I mean by protect slavery is, if some law came across the legislature and they were trying to pass it and it was against slavery, the southern states wanted to have more votes in the House so they could block anything that tried to stop their slavery. So the more people in there they had, the better for them. The northern delegates objected to counting slaves because slaves were legally considered property. Other northern delegates argued that slaves as property should be counted for the purpose of taxation and not representation. So I want to play this little video, and I want to show you how heated the meeting got when they were discussing slavery at the Constitutional Convention.
It hasn't been settled.
Our president should serve for life.
Congress should choose our president.
We should have 3 presidents. We'll settle the matter soon enough.
And I dare say we all know who will be elected our first president.
There's a more pressing issue that still must be decided. Whether the new Constitution will allow my people to be kept in slavery.
It can't do that. I mean, will it really?
It is an issue that I fear will be decided on the basis of politics, not morality.
In order to have our fair share of representation in Congress, we demand that the Constitution count 3/5 of the state's slaves as part of its population.
If Mr. Pinckney says slaves are nothing more than property, why not let Massachusetts count horses and cattle as part of our population?
Slavery will bring the judgment of heaven upon us. Does not the Honorable Mr. Mason own slaves himself? Gentlemen, if slavery is abolished by this convention, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina will not be parties to this union.
So, as you can see from the video clip, the South, when threatened with the cancellation of slavery or abolishing slavery, they threatened not to be part of the Union, and they would have left and created their own country where they didn't have to worry about that. So the solution was known as the Three-Fifths Compromise. For every 5 slaves, they wouldn't count as 5 slaves for population count, they would only count as 3. So each slave would count as 3/5 of a person. Every 5 slaves would count as 3 people for representation purposes in the House of Representatives. They also counted as 3/5 of a person for taxing purposes. So you couldn't tax 5 slaves, you could only tax 3. Southern slaveholding states insisted upon the Three-Fifths Compromise to secure more representation within the House of Representatives in order to protect slavery. In the Constitution, 3/5 of the slaves and estates were included when determining representation in Congress. So, after much debate, both compromises passed. All right, the slave trade. Am I not a man and a brother? This guy's basically saying, why do you treat me like this? Northern states wanted to ban slavery throughout the country. Southern states wanted slavery for their economy. To keep the southern states in the nation, Northerners agreed that Congress would not interfere with the slave trade for 20 years until 1808. Beginning that year, they could limit the slave trade if they chose to. So the Southerners were protected for at least the first 20 years. Bill of Rights. Some delegates wanted a Bill of Rights to be included in the Constitution, and what we mean by Bill of Rights is they wanted our rights listed in the Constitution. They wanted our rights that we had as citizens to be in the supreme law of the land so people could not take them away. Well, other people argued that we didn't need one because the powers of the government were listed. The powers for the president were listed. The powers for Congress were listed. The powers for the courts were listed. So the individual rights would be protected automatically. So they voted on it, and the Bill of Rights was defeated by a majority vote. Most people didn't think we needed one. So, approving the Constitution. The delegates finished and signed the new Constitution on September 17th, 1787. 3 delegates refused to sign without a Bill of Rights, but it still passed. To approve the old Articles of Confederation, remember, all 13 states had to ratify it. Well, they saw the problems that they had last time, so this time the delegates agreed that when 9 of the 13 states ratified, it would become the new government. And that, kids, is our lesson on the Great Compromise and the Three-Fifths Compromise. All right, here's our notebook assignment. On this side, I want you guys to draw the Constitution with the 3 branches. On this side, I want you to draw the Virginia plan. Right here, I want you to draw the New Jersey plan. And then I want you to write an essay telling the story of the creation of the Constitution. Talk a little bit about the Virginia plan and what they wanted. Talk about the New Jersey plan and what they wanted. And then talk about the solution with the Great Compromise and the Three-Fifths Compromise. Write that right here. Here's your note taker. Make sure you complete that.